Hey everybody, JD1533 here. I've got a new video for you that I really can't wait to do. Ever since I got this trash picked lawnmower engine, I've been wanting to do this video, the idea for it. And we're going to part it out. And the reason is because this has a broken crankshaft. You know, somebody hit a rock or something like that, and that's why this was thrown away and it was shattered. I've seen this running in the neighborhood, so I know it runs, or it did run. And, you know, I have no use to go through the time and effort to change the crank or the expense. And so it's basically worthless to me, other than to harvest it for parts. And there's a lot of benefits to doing that. Now, originally when I recorded this intro, I was behind the desk. It looked really cool, but without a lapel mic, you can barely hear me. So I'm going to do this way. Now, what do we mean by scrap it? I don't mean like in the thumbnail, you know, taking a big old hammer and smashing it up. That just looked pretty neat. That's why I did that. I'm talking about carefully taking it apart. We don't have to be too careful. There's a lot of great parts you can get out of these. The obvious being what you see here: fuel tank, control cables. What's neat about these control cables, they have that nice kind of Z bend on them. Probably use it on something. If not, it doesn't take up that much space to store. We've got things like carburetors and carburetor parts. Those are still on here. These parts are from another engine. Pistons, connecting rod, head bolts, cylinder head, bigger parts like a flywheel. Not a bad thing to have some extra flywheels laying around. Starter cups. All kinds of rods and linkages and assemblies for our governor and our carburetor system. Here we have a valve cover breather. We've got other assorted things like camshafts. Now the camshafts in these modern engines, they're plastic. So if you're working on an engine, you drop this, you crack it, you're out of luck till you buy a new one. If you have a couple spares laying around from some scrap lawnmowers, just in your parts bin, that can save you some time and some money ordering them. Here's a pulley, the key, that's good to have. And, you know, the list goes on and on. Here's a timing gear. This is really neat. It's kind of heavy, nice machined piece. There's our timing dot right there. They're in here. You know, people throw these things out, but a lot of great parts, full of fasteners, great parts. You know, this is an overhead valve engine, 6.5 horsepower, Briggs & Stratton. So we've got our valve cover, we've got our valve train, tappets, valves, springs, all kinds of good stuff. Muffler, air filter, fuel tank. I think I mentioned that already. There's just a lot of great parts. This is like an organ donor to help out other engines. And we got the cover here, and there's our recoil, our spring loader recoil. The string's broken off of it, the pull cord, but the spring inside works. Now it's riveted on, but we can drill out these rivets, take this unit off. This can be bolted onto another engine, put a new cord on it. It's a great part to have. So without any further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Yeah. Everybody, just real quick, had some spilled gasoline, some residual gasoline and water in the fuel line and things like that. That's why I have a plastic tray under here for oil or fluids like gasoline, also another tin there. And I just don't want the gasoline vapors floating around the shop. So I wanted to kind of dispose of that, clean it up a little bit before we continue on. And we can now move on. Yeah, everybody, before I get too much farther, I thought it'd be neat to show you this off the tripod. Remember I mentioned the broken crankshaft. I don't know if you can see in here, but at the keyway, I mean, it's just shattered off. So somebody hit something pretty significant. Now this is what was holding the blade on, as you can see. Let me hold this steady for you. I mean, if you can imagine. Look at the force. That shattered. That shattered. And the end of the crankshaft shattered right by the keyway. So this definitely has seen better days. So I think we'll speed this up with a little time lapse, take the rest of it apart. All right, everybody, different day. I decided not to do this, and I decided why not do it. I've got the engine in a vise. The crankshaft is messed up. Why not? I'm going to try to take the flywheel off and give it a few taps. I soaked it for a couple of days in PB Blaster, the flywheel nut. So let's give it a whirl. That's about it. I think it came off. Like I said, I'm not worried about chucking it up in the vise because the crankshaft is obviously shattered, and This is kind of neat. I wouldn't do it this way otherwise, but why not? Pop this nut off of here. It'll crack loose kind of nicely. And there you go. Get that in there. I've got a fair amount of residual oil here. Mop that up. So now, what I'm going to do is screw this back on about to there, and just above the top of the crankshaft threads there. Should use a crankshaft or a flywheel puller on here. But, I'll try to pop this off this way. A little leverage that way. Got my big brass hammer. I'm going to try to just give it a couple jolts. Feels like it's coming loose. I could use the big sledge, but I don't want to do that. So we've got it loose. Alright, I got to cut back in. What I thought was the flywheel coming off was actually this cheesy plastic fin piece. That's what this was hammering. A couple more taps, and basically we've got it without any damage. Let me see here. Basically it's coming right off. It's loose. Wiggle, wiggle. Squirm, squirm. We're going to get it off here. Seems to be hung up on something. Flywheel break. But yeah, when this popped loose, I got excited, but it wasn't loose. There we go. No damage. Not the right way to do it, but everybody does it that way. So there you go. Here's our flywheel. I want to point out real quick that this flywheel, like I say, this plastic piece came off with the fins. To provide the air for the housing. Not too much older a flywheel. The fins are actually cast in. So that's pretty cheap. What's cool about this flywheel is it has the gear in there. Gear teeth for an electric start if you want. I'm sure we can do something with that. But just want to share that with you. Here's our flywheel key. And we don't want to lose that. So we'll put that over here in the tin and back to time lapse, take the rest apart. Got all these kind of fabric detergent, laundry detergent caps that I save. Throw little nuts and bolts and stuff in. Find them pretty handy and they're free, so why not? This is pretty much the final step of getting this thing apart. Thought we'd do this in real time. I had a plastic tray under here, but it cracked and all the oil leaked out and got onto the workbench here overnight. It was a nice surprise. I should have known better, but it's nothing this old table hasn't seen before, so it should be all right. Mop it up a little more. Come on now. Come on, buddy. It was just easier to get in with a little box end wrench than a ratchet for this. You know, I've got those rubber gloves and all that, but I'm not going to bother with it right now. Sometimes I just like to bare hand it, just get in there and get it done. I mean, it's only motor oil. Interesting. One's shorter, one's longer. So, okay, the longer one goes to the arrow pointing up. So, I'm going to put those back together after we get it apart. Let's get our end cap off. And pop this free. Out of the way. Bare handles. That's going to be really easy to get out. And there's our crank. Pretty hefty piece. There's our damage. So we'll just set that aside. You know, I can just set it right here. Oily piece, but spilled oil all over this anyway. Why not? And now we can get in and pop the rest of this piston out. That's all there is to it. So there's our piston. Now, our rings, wheel control ring, compression ring, wiper. Who knows the real condition of that? Interesting. Okay. Got our arrow there. And I'm just going to put it all together. Back together again. Okay. So we said the longer bolt was with the arrow pointing up. I'm going to put that back together loosely. And our shorter bolts on the bottom. And there you have it. There's our piston. Put it over here. Coming up, we'll talk about the haul that we got. We'll lay it out and take a look at it. All right? Pretty neat. Check it out. All right, everybody, JD 1533. To close this segment, I'm out of time, you're out of time, we're all out of time. This video is getting long, so I want to wrap it up and talk about briefly the parts we got. Now, I didn't clean them all up, but you don't need to see that. I want to talk about something really briefly about the, we know we had a broken crankshaft. This engine hit a rock. I want to talk about the flywheel key real quick. I think it's pretty interesting, so I'm going to get it in frame here. Get behind the camera. Hopefully we can focus in on it. This is supposed to be a rectangular piece of aluminum. There's your flywheel key. Now you can see the striations and the scrapes and all. Let me get that in the light. This thing's mutilated. I mean, it's sheared off. When this engine hit that rock, this flywheel key, it did its job to protect the engine. So the only thing this engine really needed to get running again was a new crankshaft and a new flywheel key. I'm pretty well convinced after I took it apart, everything looks in pretty good order. This is a really good parts haul. We piston connecting rod, cam, governor, got a nice muffler assembly, all kinds of great stuff to sell. Little dipstick tube, recoil unit, fuel tank, magneto. I'm going to keep this for myself. All these great fasteners. This thing was headed for a landfill anyway. And we got all this great stuff. Cargo. Here's our valve guard. Here's our head. I partially disassembled it. I am going to disassemble the whole thing, clean it up, reassemble it as a unit. Somebody's going to want the entire head unit and push rods. Flywheel. This can support an electric start with the gear teeth here. I'm going to get that sold. And I mean, I'm going to have great parts for me to keep, but it's an organ donor, so it'll keep other engines running. JD 1533. Have a good night, good day, wherever you are. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'm out.